engagement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
So to get started, we'll just close our eyes and settle into your seat. Start to feel your sit bones grounding down, rooting down into your seat. And then from that sensation of dropping in with gravity, start to grow a little taller through the crown of your head, finding some space between the vertebrae, some integrity with your spine. And then just start to listen and tune in to your breath. Taking a few cycles of breath to acknowledge, to witness, to observe. And then start to set an intention for yourself for this conversation. And when you're ready, begin to blink your eyes open, taking in the light, taking in the screen. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you both for joining me.
Happy to be here.
We'll get started with some icebreakers. And so I'll ask Lee, would you rather be tied up or tie someone up?
Oh, I'd rather be tied up.
And then Ani?
I'd rather tie someone up.
Out of the 5 senses, which is the most sensual to you, Ani?
Touch.
Lee?
Taste.
Who do you call first when you have great news? I'm going to start with Lee this time.
Ani.
And Ani?
Lee.
How do you like to be shown love? And that's going to go to Ani first.
Words of affirmation, but also acts of service. Just conveniently happen to be Lee's love languages.
Perfectly aligned. And then, Lee, how do you like to receive love?
I love acts of service, words of affirmation, and I have discovered in this relationship with Ani, just feeling deep levels of his devotion. And he shows that in a number of different ways, but I've really loved receiving how he cherishes me.
Ooh, I have goosebumps. So I would love for you guys, because you're clearly a couple, so I'd love for you to share who you are, what you do. And I want to just preface, I know Lee from New York in a different lifetime, years and years ago, but I don't know you, Ani. So I would love for you to intro yourself first, and then I'll allow Lee, the space to kind of expand on who she is and what she does, and then we'll kind of jump into the questions.
Cool. When I am asked to introduce myself and describe myself, I'm usually at a loss for words, because I've spent my whole life trying to disidentify from things and keep my being and my identity so fluid that I don't feel constrained by labels. And so who I am is a combination of so many things. Deep down, I think I'm someone who romances and seduces life itself in every moment. Professionally, I'm a student of the mind and the universe and how this entire reality is architected and how it forms our experience. And I apply this in various domains like business, psychology, relationships and intimacy, and the work that Lee and I do together. And really just find greater and greater degrees of liberation in myself and the people that I surround myself with.
Thank you. And Lee?
Okay, before I answer that about myself, what Ani didn't say is that he is one of the world's, if not the world's, best coaches in the realms of business psychology and personal development, and as well intimacy and relationships. What I have witnessed him help his clients create is next level. And I very thankfully have gotten to receive a lot of that in our relationship. And it is one of the reasons why I have transformed the way I have in the 5 years that we've been together. He will never brag about himself, but I will definitely brag on him. So I'll share more about myself. I'm an intimacy coach and a psychedelic therapist. And my greater mission in this life is to help women unearth and reclaim their erotic aliveness. And to me, what that means, it goes beyond sexual acts and really is the space where we get to experience the fullness of our joy, where we're completely engaged in our lives, where we feel safe and secure to be ourselves, where we feel rested and relaxed in our own bodies and emotions, and where we get to experience the depth of love that I think every human craves to experience. And so a lot of my work in the world is not only embodying erotic aliveness for myself and then role modeling that for others, but showing women back home to deep fundamental levels of safety in themselves so that naturally their eros or life force energy flows through them. And then they bring that to dating, love, and relationships, which, is otherwise referred to as their most authentic selves. And that's the basis for how we create aligned relationships with people who are the most phenomenal match for us.
So how do you work together? So how does the work that you're doing incorporate both of you? And what do you bring to the work you're doing with, I'm assuming it's mostly women that you work with?
It has been women. We also do work with couples, but the focus of our work as of late has been working with women. And simply because there is such an opportunity right now for women to come back home to the feeling and the felt sense of safety inside of themselves. It is a state of being that we have gone without knowing for far too long. And I truly believe that we are in the era of the feminine right now. And by feminine, I don't necessarily mean women. I mean feminine energy, the energy of trust, surrender, creativity, intuition, really being able to rest into something bigger and beyond us. And that this is also the energy of unconditional love. And so that was one of the reasons why we're supporting women right now. And in our work together, we co-founded a relationship school for women. And inside that relationship school, the foundations of our teachings are teaching women how to create what we call sexy, secure love. If you think of the attachment styles, for those who have heard of it, there are different attachment styles that basically suppose that when we are interacting with others in relationship, there are certain ways that we interact based on how we were raised. And that can either be secure or some sort of insecure attachment style. What we like to teach the women inside of our relationship school is how to create sexy, secure attachment. So not only is it safe and grounded, but there's also a level of passion and fire to it, which is what we want in our romantic relationships. So if we can cultivate that within ourselves and feel deeply safe inside of ourselves, as well as turned on by ourselves, then we can bring that sexy, secure attachment into our dating and love life.
Thank you. What foundational elements do you think are necessary to cultivate sexy, secure love and cultivate that within themselves as well as within relationship?
Why don't you kick it off, Lily?
So the first and foremost, safety. Deep, deep levels of safety. Do I feel safe to come as I am, to be who I am, with all of my emotions, thoughts, desires, fears, insecurities, hopes, dreams, and boundaries? Are all parts of me welcome? And this really starts in relationship with ourselves. Am I a good steward of my own emotions, of my own thoughts, desires, and dreams? Do I create a space for those things to come to life? And do I take the necessary actions to give rise and birth the things that are ready to come into form? And so unless we feel a fundamental level of safety inside of ourselves, then the passion and the fire and the headboard knocking sex. It just doesn't happen in the transcendent way that I think so many of us are really yearning for and craving. So safety's got to be at the foundation.
Another big piece is the integration of our polarities. So everything in the universe is a fractal, and we are always in a dynamic relationship with ourselves. And within us, there are many subcomponents of our biological and physiological and even psychological system that are in dynamic relationship with each other. So our heart is in a relationship with our gallbladder, and so on and so forth. And what we experience in external relationships is just those internal structures and ways of relating being projected out. So we find that the easiest way to shift relationships that we have with other people is to find the seed fractal within ourselves that is the basis of all those other relationships. And when we talk about eros, when we talk about this idea of erotic aliveness, what we're really saying is that the entire universe is erotic by nature. The nature of the universe is erotic by itself, because there are these subatomic particles that are in relationship with each other that form, they're attracted to each other. There are these massive celestial objects that have a gravitational pull towards each other. So desire is actually how the universe operates in its current form. And desire is similarly fundamental to who we are. And so to what extent can we be in this desirous relationship with ourselves? To what extent can we allow this desire to permeate every moment of our life? And then, because the nature of the universe is erotic, for a human being to exist in their fullest being, in their fullest expression, access their fullest potential for love, for pleasure, for ecstasy, for bliss, for peace, for joy, for happiness, we need two things. First, we must penetrate the universe. We must penetrate the universe with our expression, with our truth, with our authenticity, with our desires, with who we are, all of ourselves. And any restriction to the fullness of our expression creates stagnation. And any stagnation brings about a lack of ease or disease. And that's the first part of the polarity. To what extent do we allow ourselves to penetrate the universe? The second is, to what extent do we allow the universe to penetrate us? To what extent am I able to experience? To what extent am I able to hold my emotions? To what extent can I feel joy and grief and the dark night of the soul and heartbreak and loss and the ecstasy and the joy that just emanates when I see a beautiful sunset or I'm sharing a moment with my beloved? To what extent can we allow the universe to penetrate us? And when we can find this balance, which is always dynamic, it's always changing, between being penetrated by the universe itself and penetrating the universe with all of ourselves, we end up in a really beautiful, sexy, secure relationship with life itself. And a relationship is just a simple byproduct of being in this erotic relationship with all of life.
I have to take pause because both of you are so eloquent at speaking and articulating to the bigger expansiveness of what is being human and the experience that we have, and also just grounding it so much in relatability. Like, I just want to, like, I have to acknowledge, like, both of you are so poetic about the human experience. And it's like, I just keep getting chills with what you are expressing and sharing, and the understanding of, you know, you're speaking in terms of things that we're all familiar with, or most of us are familiar with at this point, with attachment styles and that polarity of dark and light, and the energy of masculine and feminine, omega, alpha, all of those things that exist within all of us. And I've never heard anyone articulate that, of like, the universe is erotic. That's the first time I've ever heard that. And I was like, what? Like, it literally, like, light bulb brain bursting, like, whoa, you're absolutely correct in that. And that is what I'm now understanding is the work you're doing is helping people bring themselves into equilibrium, because those two will always exist. And I think in certain relationship dynamic, we fall into a role and then we play out that role on one end of the polarity, when it's like, it's possible to have both. And it's beautiful to, in relationship, encourage that in the other and create a safe space where those two things can exist. You can am I understanding that correctly? If like we all have that, and as an individual, you need to find the equilibrium within yourself and encourage and see it and support it in your partnerships.
Absolutely. And it's a dance, right? Because in our relationship, we're always moving and changing. Sometimes I'm taking the masculine polarity and sometimes Lee takes the masculine polarity. And anytime there is rigidity, it blocks the flow of energy. So relationships die because of rigidity, either within a person or between two people. And I'm influenced a lot by Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. And when we look at how TCM understands the body, what it says is that the homeostasis in a body is health. And health is the natural byproduct of the natural normal flow of energy. And when there is a stagnation in that flow of energy, it causes disease. And if we want to return health to that person, to that being, to that system, we just need to unblock the flow of energy. And relationships work the exact same way, because relationships are also a complex adaptive system. And typically, there are all of these ways that we block the flow of energy. Maybe I accrue too many withholds over the course of 5 years being in relationship. Maybe there are these fears that I have. Maybe I'm self-conscious about something, and that keeps the energy stuck and locked in my body, and she can't feel me. And when she can't feel me, she turns off. And when she turns off, I use that as evidence to confirm my worst fears about myself, then I turn off. Now we're both turned off, and when we spend an extended amount of time in this turned off state, then the relationship starts turning off. So a lot of relationships aren't at their full aliveness because there isn't the full free-flowing energy that is designed to course through it. And we were talking about the universe. In the universe, there is a design. And when we operate in harmony with the universe, we thrive. So if the nature of the universe is erotic, if the nature of the universe is intimacy, if everything in the universe is desiring itself and everything else, then when we operate in harmony with that design, we thrive. And so we really believe that when we can be in this place of what we call untamed intimacy with ourselves, can I fully know myself? Can I be with myself, with any part of myself? Can I give even the most hated, shame-filled parts of me a seat at the table? Can I love them? Can I do the same for everyone else? And when we get to that place of this insane level of intimacy with ourselves, we become capable of an extraordinary amount of intimacy with someone else. And when we then start including the rest of the world in that, then what happens is that we start existing in a totally different world than the one perhaps we grew up in. And that's a much more beautiful world. And that's the world we're trying to create. And it all starts with how intimate can be with any and every part of our experience.
Wow. Thank you. I just want to be like, fuck, my God, like you are speaking so much truth. It's mind-boggling because it's truly when you said the idea of welcoming all those parts of yourself to the table and honoring all of those parts, it's the thing that we have the privilege as beings in the human body to do. And I think to Lee's point, like we are at the precipice, the cusp of people, especially women, hungry, thirsty for that, wanting that level of intimacy. And when I think you were saying something around, turning off. And yes, this is a sexual wellness podcast, but turning off isn't just in the sex act of like, I'm completely turned off by this. It's energetic state of all parts of you. And I think a lot of people can know this when maybe you're at the darkest point of a relationship, or you're already contemplating breaking up, or you're feeling like depressed and down, or not lit up by this person anymore, and not lit up of who you are within that relationship. That I think I just wanted to clarify, like that's what we're talking about when we're saying turning on and turning off. It's not just explicitly attached to like turn off, turn on sex. It's your state of being is no longer lit up for whatever reason. And that's in relationship to work. That's it. Like you can apply these thoughts to the familial dynamic, your family dynamic, your social dynamic, your homes, all of the things that are important to us as human beings, and our relationship to them, and where they turn us on and off, and where we're hiding ourselves or withholding ourselves or shrinking ourselves. And I love that the work that you're doing is the work of grounding oneself, but then also recognizing the expansiveness within partnered relationship, expansiveness to social relationship, community, expansiveness into the universe, and how we relate to the universe at large, and the impact that we have on the universe, as well as the impact the universe has on us. So I'm so in awe and grateful for this conversation and all of the things that you both are sharing. I wanted to ask, with conflict, right? Or when someone is in that state of one polarity or the other, let's just say in a dynamic where someone may be a codependent dynamic where one person is shrinking or enabling and the other person is more of the dominant force or controlling. How do couples work through that conflict when conflict is natural? And I think a lot of people get stuck in like, this is normal for relationship, or being unhappy is normal. Like, is that making sense? Where like someone sees certain things, or like, oh, we've been married this long, we're not having sex, we're not happy, but that's normal. Like that's the standard, right? That's the evolution of relationship. And I don't think that is the truth. I think it's like, to your point of like, we are cellular and we are ever evolving, and we have so much potential to expand and grow as individuals as well as in partnership. So I would love your take on how do couples work through that, recognizing maybe the stuckness or a place of conflict.
I'll give a simple explanation, and then I have no doubt that Ani will have poetry to add to it. The first thing, like the first question someone can ask themselves is, do I feel good here? Do I feel happy or joy-filled? And before we even go to say, well, I don't because of them or him or her, because he does this or she never does that. It's like, do I feel good? Do I feel alive? Do I feel joy-filled? If we just use that one question as a litmus test, then the answer will be pretty clear. It's usually a yes or no. Yes, I do. And I am like over the moon with excitement about being in relationship to this person. Or no, I don't. I'm sure there is a case for a middle ground where there is sometimes this, sometimes that. But if we just ask that question, that's a really good starting point. Now, once we ask that question and we allow the answer, the authentic answer within us to arise, then we might say, okay, if I step back from this and I take off the hat of assigning blame or finger pointing or needing to make this anyone's fault or needing for anyone to be wrong or right, then what might be happening here? What patterns might I look for? If I were to sit and think about our most common conflict, how does it usually start? What's the trigger for it? And what's happening inside of me in the moments or even in the days or weeks leading up to that trigger being activated? And then what do I imagine might be happening for my partner if I were to put on the hat of empathy? What could be happening for them while this thing over here is happening for me? And so we're basically just approaching this like a detective where, again, we're not saying what could definitively be true. And we're just stepping back to look for patterns. And, speaking from personal example, Ani and I, just like every other couple, has had our patterns that we've played out. And there are certain things that triggered it. There are certain felt sense experiences that I had in my body and that he had in his. And it wasn't until we took a step back to say, okay, You don't feel alive and joyous. I don't feel that way either. What could be happening? What's the thing that we're always circling around, or the common conflict or pattern? Okay, what kicks that pattern off? How do you feel inside your body when that pattern gets kicked off? What sensations do you experience? What emotions? What thoughts? What do you make it mean? So what assumptions arise? And then same thing for me. We're trying to get really clear on the somatic experience we're having. In other words, the experience we're having inside of our bodies and what that means for how safe we feel and how open we feel. And then what's happening in our emotional state? What thoughts are we thinking? What are we making this mean about ourselves, the other person, the health or well-being of our relationship? And if we can just step back to gather that data, then we'd probably have enough information to go on to say, okay, we're both realizing that this is the pattern we're playing out. What can we each do? How can we each make shifts that feel authentic for us, that add to the well-being of the other, ourselves, the other person, and the relationship, so that the next time this comes up, we can just try something different. And then the last thing I'll say here is that the overall frame, and this is something that Ani taught me a lot about, because man, I used to love a good conflict. The ethos that I used to have once upon a time in the relationship is you versus me. There's a right person, there's a wrong person. There's a person that should apologize, there's a person that needs to be apologized to. And sure, that last one might be the case sometimes, but he would always say to me, Lee, I'm fighting for us. There is a we here. It is not you versus me. How would this look if we were playing for the team? And so having that frame while going into any experience is super helpful. And then the last frame that has really pulled me out of a lot of conflict as well is, wait, okay, this person in front of me loves me. And I know that there are moments that I've experienced his love. I might not feel like I'm experiencing it right now, but there are moments that we've had that I cherish. We've had moments of intimacy. We have inside jokes. So if I can just pull the resource, like the emotional resource from some of those moments into the now moment where I'm experiencing a struggle or I have a nasty story in my head about him, then I can resource my depleted state where I want to finger point and blame and attack with other moments of, wait, we do love each other. Okay, let me just remember that, and then let me plug back into the conversation and use that energy to work through the conflict.
I'll say two quick things on this. A lot of relationship issues come from one core root cause, which is the lack of integration between the two people. So in any relationship, we have two selves that are coming that need to integrate. And if both are unyielding, then typically what's going to happen is there's going to be a butting of heads, conflict, power struggle. The way to remedy this is to be yielding. And so when we yield, we can actually come together and form a greater whole that is the relationship itself. And so a lack of integration is one of the main causes for conflict. Second is that once we integrate with another human being in a relational structure, we need to actually define that relational structure, and we need buy-in from all parties. That is, we need a vision. Where are we going? Right? What's life going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now? We need shared values and principles. What's important to us? How do we make decisions around money? How do we make decisions around kids? How do we treat our bodies, and to what extent do we care about health? How does that manifest in our day-to-day life? Do we drink alcohol? Do we watch TV? What do we eat? These are simple things, but these are things we do all the time, every single day, right? And it goes all the way down to much, much, much deeper things. But we need a set of shared values and principles. And we also need, okay, how do we want to feel on this journey to that destination? Because being in a relationship with someone is like inviting them into a boat. And we're both in this boat, and we have an oar, and we're just rowing. if we don't agree on where we're going, the two people will be rowing in different directions and we're just going to spin in circles. If we're rowing in the same direction, but we're not aligned on how we want to get there and how we want to feel, values and principles, then it's going to be insufferable because this person is going to annoy the life out of us and we're going to be bickering and arguing the entire time, right? And so these are sort of fundamental things that I think a lot of people just assume that this gets taken care of when we agree to be in a relationship. And then the last thing I'll say is the relationship is like a dance. So imagine you're dancing with someone, and there are two, from my perspective, there are two energies with dancing. There's the leading and there's the yielding. And when there is a seamless balance of yielding and leading, we can watch two people dancing and it looks absolutely breathtaking. And it's literally why people watch other people dance and they're like, wow. And then there's a huge roar of applause. When it goes wrong, it's when there's either too much yielding or too much leading. And that is an imbalance of polarity. So another huge reason for why people get stuck in relationships and they struggle with conflict and, it doesn't feel as amazing as it should is because there is an imbalance in polarity. Either both people are holding the same poles, or there is a clash happening, or there's a lack of synchronization in the swapping of roles, and it's not a fluid, dynamic, beautiful dance.
I love that you're making reference to dance because I literally used that as an example this morning when I was speaking to a girlfriend on the phone who was dealing with like her and her partner are thinking about breaking up. They're in a lot of conflict right now. And I was like, you need to change your stance to change this dance, because right now you keep saying, he's doing this, he's treating me this way, I feel this way, he's making me feel this way. And I was like, but you have to I was like, literally both of your advice is what I was telling her. I'm like, you need to get more curious about why are you getting to this place over and over again? Like why? And I was like, I actually think you're dancing two different dances. It's like cha-cha and salsa, and like you're not even in the same dance, let alone like having the same rhythm. You're not listening to the same music. You're moving so completely differently. And the polarities are different. You're both trying to lead, but you're dancing different dances. and I love that that's what you guys are advising is so practical, but then it's so expansive as well. Like it's the application of these things can be everything from the mundane part of life, who's taking out the trash, to like, how do we grow and become better human beings on this planet? Those are equal measure of how do we live life, because it can't just be like, let's go and escape to Bali and live on an island and have this beautiful life together. It's like, no, we have to live the practical part of life too. So I love that both of you are offering so much intelligence around relational well-being. And what you were saying too is something I've been working towards in my own relationship. And I've noticed this with us is that we don't really have repeated conflict. And it is because we both come to the table in conversation, listen deeply, get curious about like, well, why am I feeling this way? And then also sharing that like, oh, actually, I feel this way because this is something that used to happen with my partner, my former partner. This used to happen with my mom and dad. And really expressing and feeling that within our own bodies and holding space as the partner in that dance, in that conflict of like, actually, this isn't about me, and I need to allow you the space to remove that energy, if that makes sense. Like really letting that energy go, letting that backpack of like the baggage we bring into our relationships, all of that, having that ability. My partner and I both recognize like, oh yeah, we don't have this. Like we'll have issues come up and we talk through them, and then it doesn't become a pattern in our relationship, in our dynamic. And I think it is that it's the first thing you had said was with your clients, it's about being curious about yourself. And that's something I advise a lot of friends on. And like even my friend this morning, when she was talking about the conflict, I was like, yes, we can sit here and say, he's behaving badly, he's doing this, he's doing that. But I'm curious about I'm only hearing one side of it, and it's all your perception of him. What is the side that he's experiencing? What is he receiving from you? Because this escalation doesn't happen with one person all of a sudden freaking out, because I'm sure when he's home alone, he's not blowing up in the apartment by himself. There is something that is like, we're building towards that. And so I think I love that reference of dancing. I also love the boat thing because I'm like, oh my God, so many couples, you're like, one person's rowing in this direction, the other one's in this, and you're just spinning it out. And I also think earlier when you spoke about the rigidity and flexibility, it's great to have those integration of like the vision for the future, but also just being open to the expansiveness, because that's where some of that sexiness comes in, is like the not knowing. It's not like, hey, it's the 5-year plan. We agreed to this. It's not that rigid. It's the knowing, and then being like, I'm sure you guys go on hikes or on adventures, and it's like, wait, look at this path. Like we originally mapped out this trail, but like that looks amazing, or the flowers over there look great. Let's go take a look over there. I love all of the practicality of what you guys are offering in helping individuals as well as within relationship. One of the things I also think is important to what Lee was saying is that ability to be vulnerable and be curious and then understand oneself then allows like, and what you were saying in your personal experience of like, oh yeah, you loved being combative before this relationship. And I think a lot of people get addicted to that. Like, let's fight and let's fuck. Let's fight and let's fuck. And it's an interesting thing of like, but think about how much you can do with that fiery energy when you're not fighting with your partner. And I have found like, because my partner and I aren't often in conflict and battle, both of us are much more creative. We're channeling that fiery energy to another space that actually feels good rather than feels draining. Like I'm taking that fire and that passion into other parts of my life.
Ani talks about this often, and he would say that to me when I would bring a fight. He would say, "You're wasting your energy. You can do so many other things with that." And I didn't get it until I got it. Mm-hmm. We have a very finite amount of energy. And so what are we using it for? And when we are operating in harmony, and we're operating in whatever feels like alignment for us, then we liberate stored energy that we have. And it's almost like I have no idea where I got all this energy from, but now that I'm not fighting, now that I'm not resisting things, now that I'm not shaming some of my own experiences or emotions, now that I'm not finger pointing and blaming, oh my gosh, I have all this energy. Wow, it's miraculous.
Yeah, now that I'm not caretaking either. Or now that I'm not playing small. So even in the conflict, the partner that might be more like shrinking themselves or, limiting their own beliefs in themselves. Like when you open that up, you have so much expansive energy. It's kind of incredible. Let's take a quick break. Hey there. Allow me to introduce you to something that has completely transformed my body, the floss. The floss isn't just a trend. It's a movement method that has reshaped the way I approach my well-being. Imagine a subscription-based platform that offers you a key to unlocking your body's potential. Fascia flossing, as it's called, doesn't just scratch the surface. It remaps the fascia network of your body. Through a tailored blend of physical manipulation, guided resistance movement, and muscle elongation techniques, it's like giving your body a personalized renovation. Since adding the floss to my daily practice in 2019, I've experienced incredible improvements across the board. My mind-body connection is stronger than ever. And let's talk about the intimate aspects. Yes, it has boosted my sexual health connection too. You can hear more about that in the episode I recorded with the founder of the floss, Bonnie Krotzer. The floss supports all of my body systems, enhances mobility, offers prevention, and provides that active recovery we all need. Curious to learn more? Head over to thefloss.com, and if you use the code HEADSOUTH, HEADSOUTH, all caps, you'll receive 50% off the first month.
Not all lubes are created the same. Here at Head South, we've worked diligently to pare down the ingredients so there is no fuss and no unnecessary bits and bobs. Head South intimacy serums make it simple and easy for you to reduce friction and enhance pleasure. Listeners can get 20% off their first order of a starter kit using the code PODCAT24. That's PODCAT24. And now, back to the episode.
I also wanted to chat to you guys about how do you make this work? So in relationship as well as in work, how do you guys, tread the line between collaborative partners, romantic partners, love partners? How does that work for you? Because I witness a lot of couples who go into business together and the dynamics are really off sometimes, or like you could see like the business crumble, like things fall apart pretty quickly sometimes when couples try to work together and also have a relationship and also have a family. So how do you guys make those different roles in your dynamic work?
We had to try things out, just like many other couples who go into business together. And for the first part of it, we found a lot of non-examples about how to operate. And that was a really great petri dish to see our patterns, because not only were we relating romantically, but now professionally. So we're pretty much spending all of our time together. So from a really sort of like foundational level, one, I had to be willing to see the patterns that I was playing out that were creating conflict and separation, relationally and professionally, because whatever I brought to the relationship after hours was what I was bringing to the business during work hours. And so I had to be willing to see, okay, there are some patterns that I'm bringing that are not working. We're not creating what we want to create. We're not feeling good about it. And we're not achieving the things that we want to achieve or serving the world in the way that we wish to. And so it took me a minute to like really uncover what those were, and then, get my ego on board so that I could work through some of the deep wounds that I had brought to this relationship. And again, I say that not that, I have any shame about it. There were just wounds and patterns that I brought with me that were illuminated because of the level of intimacy and depth that Ani and I have created in our relationship. And so I'll sidebar that by saying that for those who think that getting to the relationship is the final destination, then all of a sudden things will always be sunshine and rainbows. In many ways, this is when the work begins. And it is an altar for us to be in devotion to ourselves and to the person that we're choosing as our partner. So I had to be willing to see my patterns and acknowledge them and really address them inside of myself. I had to be willing to allow parts of my identity to be completely obliterated, because I came into the relationship thinking certain things about myself, among which were not worthy, not enough, too much, he's only going to leave. And I didn't realize that I was bringing those narratives in. They were outside of my conscious awareness. And when stuff started getting really intimate and deep, that's when all of the narratives and patterns came up. So I had to be willing to let go of some of the identities that I was very attached to. And then I had to be willing to ask myself, okay, what boundaries either do I need to set in place with myself or within the context of our romantic or working relationship so that we can experience the kind of intimacy, growth, impact that we want. And sometimes it means that laying in bed at night, if, one or the other of us brings up a work topic, the other one can say, we're not doing that right now. And it can even be small boundaries like that so that there is some separation between these different roles that we play for each other.
I'll just add one piece to that. We play a lot of roles in our relationship with each other. And I think that's true for most couples. You're a lover, you're a cheerleader, you're a friend, your family, you're a confidant, you're an adventure partner, and so many things. The biggest challenge with going into a professional relationship with your partner, in addition to a romantic one, is that business can sometimes take over. And sometimes it just eats up the time, space, and energy that was reserved for other roles, because it just seems to be a monster sometimes that just consumes everything in sight. And so the antidote for that, it's taken some trial and error to get to, but it's having the boundaries and having the discipline to consciously create and allocate time, energy, and attention to those other roles so that we don't lose other aspects of our relationship, in favor of the professional collaboration. Because like anything, it can either bring us so much closer, because In some ways, a business partnership is even more intimate than a marriage,
Mm-hmm.
because we're
Yes.
literally creating a shared entity together, and in other ways, it can destroy a relationship. And it just, the difference is how much intentionality, care, and again, intimacy do we want to bring to all parts of that system?
Thank you. I wanted to ask you both, because you use this word so beautifully, but what does devotion mean to you in partnership?
I know that Ani will probably have a lot to say on this. I did not know what that word meant until this relationship. And I will share from the perspective of what it's like to feel his devotion to me. In our relationship, and again, this might mean different things for different people. For us, Ani has always said, the greatest way that I can serve you is to help you see your own greatness and to help you love yourself unconditionally. And I came into the relationship with a lot of conditions on my love with myself. If my body shape was a certain size, if I performed a certain way in work, if I was making a certain amount of money, then okay, I could love myself. And if things weren't that way, then I would withdraw love. And that was just something that I experienced a lot in childhood. And so often what his devotion looked like, especially in the beginning, was confronting me and penetrating. And I don't mean sexually, but I mean with the light of his awareness. As he saw something, he would say something. And you get that being a New Yorker on the subways. If you see something, say something. Well, he saw a lot of things, and he said a lot of things about how I was causing harm to myself. And these are things that I didn't want to address in the beginning. And in fact, they really, really challenged my ego because they challenged this limited identity that I had for myself. And there would be times where he would step back and say, this is the way that I show my devotion to you. I help you see the things that are standing in your way, and I help you resolve them. I have the sight to see far distances, and I have a vision for myself, for you, for us in this relationship. So will you just trust me? And he just consistently shows his devotion in that way, where like, if there's anyone on the face of this planet that's got my back, it's him. And sometimes it's words of affirmation and affection, and he shows devotion in that way. It's always believing in me. It's helping call me forth when I'm stuck in a pattern or something that is not in my best interest. And that's how it's been since day one. And so when I receive Ani's devotion, the feeling of it is like he's working in tandem with my higher self, and they're colluding in the best ways to help me like realize the fullness of who I am. And not because I need to be any different or change, but because there is even more joy and aliveness that gets liberated when I show up as that version of me, which is deep down who I want to be anyway.
And I'll just throw in a definition which I just formed in my head as Lee was talking. Being in a devotional partnership is basically being a steward for your partner's higher self. And sometimes that requires putting them and their needs and their well-being and their desires ahead of our own. And that's not an act of self-sacrifice. It's not a kind of harm we do to ourselves, like people-pleasing, but it is a very intentional, conscious choosing of the other and cherishing them so intensely that it is the deepest kind of offering from one's heart.
Thank you both. I love both of your definitions of that. And I want to express, because I think there is this, and I want to get your take on it, is I love the idea of that devotional love for someone, a devotional relationship towards someone, because I've only pretty much historically heard it in terms of, in spirituality and yogic practices, my guru, my devotion. I did a lot of kirtan while I was in New York to stay sane. And so there was a lot of devotional expression in that. So I've never heard a couple speak to devotional relationship, but what I want to understand or get your take on is it is that belief of seeing someone's full potential. I notice, and I try to be cognizant of in, giving advice to girlfriends, is that in dating, you can see someone's potential. And I just recently saw a few different videos on like TikTok and Instagram of this. And I think Megan Fox was speaking to it, one of the videos I've seen, of like falling in love with someone's potential and their unwillingness to actually grow or change. So like from what I'm understanding is like a devotional practice towards someone is that seeing that bigger vision. And it's what's beautiful about us as humans of the see something, say something is the greatest gift we can give somebody is being a mirror, but also being a mirror of support. Like it's not just a cold glass. There's a human behind that mirror that is there to support, to root for you, to cheer for you, to see what is your potential. But what happens when, and I see this a lot with women in relationship to men. So heterosexual relationships, especially dating, of like seeing someone's potential and then getting stuck in a relationship that's like, I have to sometimes be like, wait, the reality is this. You're not actually in love with the reality of where this person's at. You love the potential of the family, the home, all of those things, like the fantasy, the dream, but you're not even aligned, speaking to earlier of like integrating, like, where does this go? What differentiates or what creates that ability of not confusing seeing someone's potential and falling in love with their potential?
So I think everyone should fall in love with people's potential.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, and this is, maybe contrary to how it's considered in pop culture, I think if people fell in love with other people's potentials more, the world would be a better place. And I think romantically, we're not just entering into a relationship with someone's present, but we're also entering into a relationship with their future. So when we decide to be in a relationship with someone or marry someone, we're also relating or marrying all their future selves, including their future 80-year-old, 90-year-old, and so on. And this is, by the way, why choosing a partner, committed relationship is the single most important decision that a person makes, because there's nothing else that has that much of an impact on a person's life. So I think where people struggle is not so much that they fall in love with people's potential and, that leads them astray. I think it's that they ignore or avoid actually seeing their current self, their current reality. And the reason is that we filter out information that we don't like. The way the brain works primarily is by removing information, because at any given moment, we're getting a vast amount of information coming at us. We can't process all of it. So the brain excludes most of it. And each of our brains, because of the upbringing we had, the experiences we had, the trauma, all of that, we filter selectively slightly differently. So one person, may go on a date and they might, see some things that they would consider obvious red flags and like, you're lovely, but I don't think there's a fit here. Someone else may go on a date, same person, same things, and they may not see any of it. Or they may actually, their attachment system might actually have been warped to find those traits desirable and attractive. And so what happens is that, people get into relationships, and then that's when the evidence of who they currently are becomes much harder to ignore. And then they realize like, oh, I bias towards potential more than, who they actually are in this current moment. And then the whole thing falls apart. So I think really it's to what extent can we be, self-aware to an extraordinary level where we're super tuned into our biases that are implicit, our triggers, the things that, we experience that cause us to, be polarized towards certain traits over others. And to what extent can we truly be intimate with people, because true intimacy is into me, you see, like us actually seeing someone, not selectively filtering out stuff, but can we truly be with them and hold this much bigger, wider, open-hearted context where we're allowing all of that information to come in, and then we make decisions based on the full context.
I guess I would just add one thing to that, which is the difference between seeing someone's potential versus seeing our own fantasy. There's a difference if I were dating someone, for example, and I had a fantasy of marriage, kids, white picket fence, yet that was not necessarily what my partner wanted. I could be projecting my fantasy onto him and seeing all of these things on the horizon. However, seeing someone's potential, when I look at Ani now, I see his potential to be one of the world's most prolific leaders in his industry. And so when I see potential in that way, like what he is capable of, what he has the capacity for as an individual in his own right, that to me in my mind is different than what I might fantasize will happen in our relationship. I think the other thing I'll say about that is making these things explicit. So I also think it's okay to be in love with someone's potential if I'm saying, hey, here are the things that I am really desiring in our relationship. Is that something that feels possible for you? Do you also want marriage and kids? Do you also want to move out of the city and into the suburbs, into a multi-million-dollar home? Are we on the same page about what we're both seeing as potential? And in terms of me seeing someone's potential, are these the things that they want for themselves? Because I could project my fantasy onto someone all I want, but if that's not what they want for themselves, then there will be a misalignment.
Thank you both. I think, to speak to the choice, I love that you framed it, Ani, as like making the choice of a partner is one of the greatest, biggest, most impactful decisions we will make for our lives. And I was like, wow, that is so true. I think that is an incredible insight. And I think what I do, a practice that I've done, which was one of the best relationship advice I was given by a friend, was choose your partner every day. Like that's not just like, oh, I made the choice, I chose you, we are married, and that's it. And the same thing to Lee's point of like checking in those questions that you asked to ensure alignment. Like, hey, do you want to have kids? Rather than living out a fantasy in your mind and then you're seeing the reality and ignoring it. But the idea of, because we are not rigid, checking in, like having these types of conversations all the time. Because I'm sure in the 5 years that you guys have been together, the dreams, the goals, the things that you wanted to integrate in life have changed and evolved. The places you've wanted to live, the spaces you wanted, the people you wanted to be have evolved and changed, but you always kind of come back to realigning, and there's values within that kind of hold it, like knit it all together. And I'm so sad because I do have to wrap up the conversation. This has been one of my favorite conversations I've had on the podcast. I've done about 50 episodes, and I love how much you guys both speak to so many different things within the realm of relational wellness, and from everything from psychology to the practicality of just, who's doing what chores, to the spirituality, the expansiveness. You exactly speak to what is the reason why I started Head South Radio, and why I started Head South was the idea that it is mind, body, spirit, like sexuality, relational wellness is integrated into all of those things as individuals, as well as within partnership and more expansively within society. And I love how you both dance so beautifully in conversation, where one of you might speak to more of the practical, the other one then adds and expands on it from a more spiritual standpoint or something a little bit more esoteric. And then you dance back and forth and add and elaborate. And the conversation is just so beautiful to watch. And I love within that, just in this hour of seeing you both speak so much adoration, admiration, with vulnerability, and expressing and sharing your own experiences within your relationship as well as in the work that you do. I am so honored to have you both on the podcast and so moved by the work that you're doing and so appreciative.
Thank you so much for having us on. It's been such a joy and pleasure to reconnect and get to have such a deep conversation.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure to be here.
So to wrap up, how do people find you? How do they work with you? And is there anything that we missed in conversation that you wanted to also share?
So people can find me on Instagram at Leenoto _ Leenoto. That's the best way to connect with me. And then Ani?
Ani.Manian, ani.manian on Instagram and all the things.
And I'll just share what's really lighting us both up right now in terms of our collaborative work together is we've got a retreat for women on the horizon called Erotically Alive. And it's going to be happening here in Austin, Texas in July. So if anybody wants the details for that, hop on over to Instagram and follow me. And it's all about helping women return to their erotic life force energy, the energy that is the source of our joy, our well-being, our abundance, our pleasure, and anything a woman could ever wish to experience in this life.
Amazing. Thank you both. I appreciate both of your time, your wisdom, your insight, your vulnerability.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me,